it play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to this review of Shadow War Armageddon. Now, before we get into the review, I do have some disappointing news. We lost one of our filmed games for our Armageddon little mini campaign. Game number 9 was supposed to be a game between Josh and Quirk, Skitari versus Grey Knights, and it was filmed, but then through some human error, which I won't go into the details, unfortunately all the footage was lost. Essentially somebody thought that the footage had been downloaded and then it was deleted, and it doesn't really matter names or who did it, but it is gone and there's really no way to retrieve it. So I'm disappointed by that. I know you'll be disappointed by that as well, but I think on average we lose one battle report every year or two. So I guess it's not too bad a track record. It just sucks when it actually happens. But thankfully it wasn't with a guest, somebody who flew in to play against us, and we lost that battle report. We have a lot of safeguards in place, but human error is human error. And so game number 9 is gone. The reason game number 9, it kind of sucks that that one's gone, is because Quirk and Josh were in the lead in the campaign for Prometheum caches. So it was really like the one that determined who the winner was going to be. So I'll just tell you that Quirk won the game, had the most Prometheum caches by the end, and was the winner of the campaign. But game number 10, which is now game number 9, is going to be in the MiniWarGaming vault right now. So a link in the video description below will get you there. That's going to be the consolation match between Steve and me. It'll be Orcs versus Gene Stealer Cult. It was a great game. We played on the waterboard again with all the scenery on it, and it was a lot of fun. It was a good matchup, good showdown, and we just slugged it out and had a lot of fun. So now that we've played a bunch of games of Armageddon, I think we've played 12 games on camera, plus all the extras that we did have filmed off camera before as we were learning the game. I think it's fair time that I do a review. I think I've played it enough that I can give it a fair review. I'm not going to be showing you all the contents. I did a separate unboxing video, which you can check out. I'll put a link to that in the video description below as well. And so you can go check out that. You can also check out the video, a link once again in the video description, to the Necromunda versus Armageddon. So what are the differences between the two? Which can essentially be boiled down to not much, but the campaign system is totally different. So the rules-wise, it's mostly stayed the same, but the campaign system has totally been redone because it's no longer gangs, it's different factions, which has led some people to be like, well, that's not Necromunda then, and I can see why they say that, but a game's a game, and it's still compatible with Necromunda, which is kind of nice. But I want to talk about my feelings of this game overall, and just my good points about it, and things that I don't like about it, and things that I would change, and all of that, so you can kind of get a fair review. Now, if you're one of those people that didn't manage to get a copy of Shadow War Armageddon, I do want to say that, don't worry, this isn't all for nothing. They're not going to be doing more of the boxes, I don't think. You might be able to find some stragglers on eBay or in your local gaming store, but they are going to be releasing the rules and terrain separately, and they've already announced that they're going to be updating the rules to include some more factions. I think Sisters of Battle was one of them, and I can't remember what the other one was that they hadn't mentioned. But essentially, it seems that they're planning on continuing to do some more support for this as well. So don't worry. I think in a couple of weeks, the rules will be available for you to get, and so you'll be able to enjoy the game as well as everybody else. Other thing you can do is just find the old Necromunda book, and you can actually play that too, because the rules haven't changed. You just won't have the rules for all the factions that are in the rule book, but you can go to Games Workshop's site and download all the individual faction rules that they have added for everybody else. So no worries, the game is going to be accessible to everybody who wants to get it. It's just a box, they had underestimated the demand of that. So let's talk about this game. First off, if you're totally new to this, what is Armageddon? Armageddon is a small skirmish scale game for Warhammer 40k. It is pretty much exactly the same of old Necromunda game, if you've ever heard of the old specialist game Necromunda, which was based off of Warhammer 40k's 2nd edition rules. So it actually uses a lot of 2nd edition rules with some modifications to make it more granular, I guess would be the right word, where there's a lot more detail on the miniature scale. And so it plays really well at a low point scale, but if you try to up the points, then it starts to get a little cumbersome. But that's typically how skirmish games work. You have this kind of cutoff. Do you want to play with a low number of models with lots of granularity, lots of RPG elements, lots of detail? Or do you want to play a large scale game with lots of models that have less details per model, not the models themselves, but the rules? And you have to kind of separate those two. I always thought, as I played games, that I'd play a game like Lord of the Rings, and then I'd try to scale up to a bigger game, and it wouldn't work. And I think that was a fault of the rules, but it's not a fault of the rules, it's just the fact that if you make rules for skirmish games, they typically don't scale up. And if you make rules for large-scale games, they sometimes can scale down, but they usually start to have problems. Like if you play Warhammer 40k at only I guess this would be almost equivalent to playing like 100 or 200 points. It's roughly kill team size, I would say. But the points don't really translate over perfectly because they even change the stats of the guns and everything. So it's more like going back to 2nd edition. Apparently, with heavy rumors of 8th edition coming out soon, Games Workshop has talked about things that they're going to be doing for it, and some of the elements are familiar to anybody who's played Armageddon or Necromunda. Things like ballistic skill modifiers instead of cover saves, and things like armor save modifiers rather than armor penetration values. Will be probably, as have pretty much been announced, that they're going to be in 8th edition. But I don't think that that means that they're taking these rules and putting them to 8th edition. I think because this is 2nd edition 40K and they're bringing back some of those elements, that's where the similarities are. But Armageddon itself, it's meant to be played at a small scale. The games are typically very fast. They can go anywhere from 15 minutes to, if a really slow one would be 45 minutes to an hour. And they're meant to be fast-paced, played with lots of terrain, and multi-level terrain in the underhives of Armageddon or Necromunda or whatever fan-made location that you play. And it has a campaign system involved in it as well. Pretty simplistic campaign system. There's some aspects to it that can be considered a little more complicated, but overall, it's a pretty straightforward campaign system. It's pretty easy to pick up and learn. We did make some mistakes as we played the games. I learned that we did the rescue mission wrong, or things like when you get your extra attacks. So there's just little nuances like that, but we've only played a little more than a dozen games, so it's always going to be little mistakes there. All I have to say first off the bat is I absolutely love this game. I am so excited to continue playing it. I've already been working feverishly on creating our own MiniWarGaming narrative campaign based on Armageddon. It's going to be in a different location, and I'm creating totally new factions based on what the employees in the building want to play. And so my intent isn't to rewrite the campaign rules. I'm actually using the old Necromunda rules along with some fan-made stuff from Yak Tribe, like the Inquisimunda stuff, to help build it. But I'm super excited because the base rules that come in Armageddon are just so fun to play. Like, you can easily play it as a pickup game where you just quickly throw together your 1,000-point gangs, or your kill teams as they're called, and you can throw down a game really fast. If you want to do a campaign, it's really not hard to organize. And for the most part, you can kind of play it casually, where people can come in and out of the campaign midstream. It's unfortunately doesn't have the mechanic to really allow the imbalance of different factions. Like, if somebody's been playing for a while and they've upgraded, and somebody creates a new kill team, then they're going to have an advantage, whereas the old Necromunda would give the lower guys some advantages in terms of extra experience or extra earnings if they actually manage to beat them, some like underdog bonus. But let's divide it into two main parts. First, I want to talk about the rules, and second, I want to talk about the campaign. So the rules would get a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 in my books because they are solid. There was very little confusion in what we had to do, and they're really, really, really fun. It's fast-paced, it's granular. Like, for example, when you shoot your weapon, if you hit the target, they get pinned. In other words, they lie down on their back, and they can't do anything on their next turn. At the end of their next turn, they stand up, unharmed. Now, after you hit them, you roll to wound, just like you would in regular 40K or Fantasy or many other games where you compare strength to toughness. If you manage to wound them, then they have an armor save. The nice thing about Armageddon compared to Warhammer 40K 7th edition is that there's armor save modifiers rather than straight up armor ignoring armor penetration stuff. For example, in 40K 7th edition, if you have a 3+ armor and you're hit by an AP4 weapon, you get your 3+ save. If you have a 5-up armor and you're hit by an AP6 weapon, you still get your 5-up save. The AP has to be equal to or lower than your armor save to negate it. So it's an all or nothing thing. But in this one, you have save modifiers. For example, most strength 4 weapons will have a -1 save modifier. So if you had a 3-up save and were hit by a strength 4 bolter, then you'd actually have a 4-up save instead of a 3-up. The nice thing about armor modifiers, rather than straight up either it does all or nothing, is it allows the lower strength weapons to actually still be effective. It also allows Terminators, which aren't plentiful in this game at all, to be super, super powerful. Because in 2nd edition, a Terminator had a 2+ save, but they rolled 2d6 rather than 1d6 to see if they would actually pass their armor save, making them near indestructible against pretty much everything. Like, if you have a 2+ save and you roll 2d6, well, if there's no armor penetration, it has no chance of getting through. And at the same time, you hit them with a plasma gun that's like a -2 or a -3, then all of a sudden they have a 4-up or 5-up save, but it's still on 2d6, so they have a good chance of passing it, but you could still get through it. So mass amounts of strength 4 fire could still get through it, or a last cannon, which is a high strength and then like -6 save, which makes that 2 up and 8 up, all of a sudden on 2d6 is not quite as useful. And then on top of that, the last cannon doesn't just do 1 wound if you fail your save, it does d6 wounds. It was a really good mechanic to make Terminators really useful, but still have some counters to them without it being an all or nothing kind of thing. For example, in 40k now, if you have a 2-up save Terminator, well, there's lots of plasma guns, there's lots of Melta, but for some reason, a crack missile, strength 8, AP3, the Terminators will just shrug off. Whereas in Armageddon, or 2nd edition 40k, that same crack missile I think has, I might get some of these numbers wrong, but it was strength 8 and it has like a -4 armor. So it wasn't an all or nothing kind of thing. Now he's got a 6-up save, although on 2 dice. And so he's got a half decent chance of doing it, but at least you know when you hit him with a crack missile that you're lowering his armor rather than negating it altogether. On top of that, the high strength weapons have a better chance of doing multiple wounds if you fail your saves, rather than having tons of shots to make up for that. So that one strength 9 shot against in 40k, last cannons are not the way to take out Terminators, because you fire a last cannon and at most you're going to kill 1 Terminator. Whereas in Armageddon, 1 last cannon still can only take out 1 Terminator, but they're a bigger deal, so that's okay. So I really like the armor save modifier. The other thing that they have that is from 2nd edition as well, and which will be in 8th edition, is ballistic skill modifiers. One of my beefs with 7th edition, and I love 40k 7th edition, it's just I have a lot of beefs with the rules because there's a lot of problems with it, even though I find it a lot of fun. One of the beefs I have is cover saves. To me, it never made sense that you either took an armor save or you took a cover save. If I was in 3+ power armor and I'm behind a super strong wall that covers me up to my neck, you would think that I'd be more survivable than if I was out in the open. But the mechanics of 40k 7th edition state that, no, you either take your armor save or your cover save. So if the guy hits you with an AP3 weapon, which ignores your armor, well, then you take your cover. And if they hit you with anything else, you take your 3-up armor save. But shouldn't the cover make them more survivable even if they're already wearing power armor? Well, 2nd edition 40k, 8th edition 40k, and Armageddon solved that problem by, instead of giving you a cover save, giving you a modifier to your ballistic skill. If you're behind partial cover, which is essentially up to half of you is covered, then they get -1 to hit. If you're behind full cover, which is they can see you but more than half your body is covered, then they get -2 to hit. And then if they hit you, there's no modifier for cover because they've already gotten past the cover. So now when you have a Space Marine behind cover, it makes them harder to hit, but if you do manage to hit them, then we work out the armor. And I really love that. It allows cover to make sense for everybody. A Terminator benefits from cover because he's harder to hit. And that just makes sense to me. I know that games don't always have to make sense. Rules are abstracted, and really in the end you're playing a game which needs to have simple enough rules for people to play, and yet complex enough for there to be depth and enjoyment. But still, it's nice when certain things just make more sense. The other thing about armor saves is all of a sudden, and what you had happening in 3rd and 4th edition, was that bolters no longer really mattered against the more heavily armored things. It more became, how many guys do I have to buy before I get special weapons? So you buy a tactical squad in 7th edition, for example, and you don't really care about your bolter guys. You only care about those 2 specialists that you get for your 10-man squad. So usually you take your grav cannons, or your plasma guns, or meltas, or whatever happens to be. And the bolter guys are really just there to provide extra wounds. Now I know that's not always the case. Obviously bolters are useful weapons against some races, but in the end when you're buying those, you're thinking about those special weapons. Most army compositions think about the special weapons instead. Well, in 2nd edition, bolters, being strength 4 -1, even if they're firing at power armor Marines, go from a 3-up save to a 4-up save, so they can actually start cracking through that. So the small arms fire actually starts to matter, which is really nice. And so a lot of the bloat that you see in 7th edition is not necessary in order to make things balanced and workable. And Armageddon is a throwback to that and just plays really nice. I can see why people really like the older editions. Now, I shouldn't say that everything has gotten worse in 2nd edition, because that is not the case. The combat system, the close combat system in Armageddon is quite complex. It's okay because most of the time you're just fighting one guy against one guy, or maybe one guy against 2 guys. But there's a lot of modifiers and there's a lot of things to think about. And so if I ever actually got like 5 guys versus 5 guys into close combat, that would actually take a long time to resolve. Whereas in 7th edition, it's pretty darn quick. And so, like I said, it doesn't scale up. And so there is that to have to say about the rule set as well, which is why 7th edition works at the larger scales and Armageddon definitely would not. And so I would say, if you wanted to play a small scale 40k game, you wouldn't play Kill Team anymore. you would play Armageddon. It's easy enough to learn. It's not a small rule book. Like when you look at it, it's this big a book, and is only, as opposed to a lot of the other Games Workshop books, only the first 20 pages is story. Whereas a lot of their other books have a lot more story, and then they get to the rules. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just trying to let you know that when you see that it's only this thick, you have to realize that this is pretty much all rules, all full color, all very well spelled out, with very little issues that'll need to be FAQ'd. So rule-wise, the game is great. It also encourages my favorite type of playstyle, which is lots of terrain. That's why I enjoyed games like Infinity so much, is because you load the table with terrain, and to me that is one of my favorite aspects of all miniature wargaming, is the terrain. The models are obviously very important, but to me it actually goes terrain, then models, and then the actual game itself. If I can create something that looks awesome, that's what drew me into miniature wargaming to begin with, was Lord of the Rings, and seeing the aesthetics of the possible boards that you can make, doing like a Minas Tirith or Khazad Dûm and all these different places. That drew me into the hobby more than the models themselves did. And I just loved immersing myself into that. And it's still my most favorite part of miniature wargaming is the terrain. And Armageddon, basically you need a lot of terrain, otherwise the game doesn't play very well. You can play the game without terrain. It's not like Infinity, where if you don't have terrain, the game gets kind of dumb, because everybody's always on Overwatch. In this one, you could play without it, but then really the close combat armies would not be able to do anything ever, and you lose a lot of the dynamics of the game. For example, one of the really cool dynamics of the game is if you get hit and you're within an inch of any ledge, you have to pass an initiative test or fall off. And when you fall, you take some pretty nasty damage if you fall far enough, at least 4 inches, and all of a sudden you're taking multiple wounds. It's going to like knock the wind out of you and possibly kill you. And that's on top of the actual damage you take from the weapon itself. If you think this sounds really punishing, that every hit you're pinned and you have a good chance of going down, well, it is. And that's why it's so fun, because even your low strength weapons are still good for pinning the enemy. And then there's mechanics to help you get out of pinning as well, but you have to really think about those. There's a lot of strategy to it. The game's also incredibly random. It's small scale. Let me put it this way. My very first 2 games I lost, and I couldn't wait to play more. So when a game plays in such a way that even when you lose, you have a lot of fun, then you know it's doing something right. So rules-wise, want to say A+, 9 or 10 out of 10, 5 stars, 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. All those things are great. Now let's talk about the campaign system. For me, the campaign system of Armageddon was probably the biggest letdown of the entire thing. Because I knew it was going to be like Necromunda, I knew Necromunda had a really neat campaign system where it's very role-playing like. You actually create a gang at the beginning, you generate 5 territories from this big list of very narrative-y, very lore-like locations, and they tell you how you generate income from them and all the different special effects that they do. And then each guy gains experience and levels up individually, and when they level up, they can gain new attributes or new skills, and they have this nice big skill tree as well. And you can also go to the market and buy all sorts of different weapons, and it even has mechanics for making a bunch of the stuff rare, and you can only find certain amounts of them. And all that I love the idea of. Armageddon basically gets rid of most of that in favor of a much more simplistic campaign system. Now I understand why Games Workshop Specialist Division probably decided to do this. For one thing, they're no longer working with just one type of gang. Necromunda just had one type of faction, which was a gang, which had a gang leader, it had its troops, its gangers, its juvies, and its heavies. And then you could choose a house that you were affiliated with, and that house determined what kind of equipment you could buy at the beginning and what kind of skills you leveled up with. But really that was it. All sorts of, extra stuff in the White Dwarfs came out to supplement that. But the base campaign system was just essentially one faction. It was humans versus humans versus humans versus humans. And so the campaign system could all have all of that, whereas a new one, now it's Necrons and Tyranids and Genestealer Cult and Eldar and Dark Eldar and Harlequins and Grey Knights and Scout Marines and Orcs and Astra Militarum and now Sisters of Battle, and who knows what else they're going to add to it in the future. How do you create a complex campaign system that incorporates all of those? For example, if they did a territory system, why would Necrons care about territory? I'm not saying you couldn't make it work. I'm just saying that it would take a lot more work than they probably thought was worth the effort. If they saw Armageddon as what it really is, and that is a gateway game into Warhammer 40k, then the game itself is solid enough to get the people interested into then collecting larger armies and playing 40k. Because in the end, this game does not promote the sale of many models. You can buy 10, 15, maybe 20 models, and you're done. That's all you have to do. And you can play this game forever. You can build all sorts of different kinds of kill teams with those same models. Obviously, you might want to start other kill teams, but still, it's not going to sell a lot of models. So they probably view this more as a type of thing that can pull people into playing the larger scale games of Warhammer 40K. So the campaign wouldn't be quite as important to them as the actual rule set, which I think they did a really good job on. But it's still disappointing. For example, in Necromunda, when you finished a game, you generated income based off of all your territories. Well, in Armageddon, you just get 100 gold or credits to spend, and that's it. You can get an extra 100 if you throw away one of your Prometheum caches, which you need to build up in order to win the campaign. But everybody just gets 100. They can use it to recruit new guys, or they can use it to rearm, upgrading existing guys. No matter how much you've won or how much you lost, you get that much, and that's it. And you don't get to keep any of it, so it doesn't carry over, which can create some problems for some of the more elite armies, such as the Grey Knights or Harlequins, where their individual members cost a lot of credits to purchase. And so since you can't build them up, then you actually lose a lot of your credits when you're playing those armies. And maybe that was their intent. I still don't like it, though. I don't think that in order for it to be balanced, some factions should just lose credits. Like, if that's the problem, then they should be more expensive, and then you can just kind of work it out that way. Furthermore, there's not really any cool narrative aspect to it, that they all just get 100 credits. I love the idea of the narrative in the Necromunda gangs. When you actually look at the territories, like, this is a gambling hall that they're running, and they roll 2d6 and times that by 10, but if they roll any doubles, then they actually lose that amount of money instead because it's gambling. Or there's another one where they're searching for, they found this like hoard of old ancient technology, and they gain 2d6 times 10 gold, but they can actually increase that 2d6 to anything up to 6d6. But if they increase it beyond 2d6 and roll any doubles, then people discover it because they've basically given themselves away by bringing too much good tech, and it gets stripped down and becomes a very low income area. Just things like that. Or there's ones where you find there are tunnels, and they allow you to deploy differently by having a tunnel, or vents that allow you to deploy differently. Or you can actually have mines where when you capture the enemies, you can actually put them to work in the mines and generate additional income. Like, that's really cool, instead of just, here's 100. But like I said, would Necrons care about half of that? Would Tyranid warriors, one of the factions is just straight up Tyranid warriors, do any of that? Would the Eldar or Dark Eldar do some of those things? Like, obviously the answer is yes for some and no for others, which is where it gets complicated. So I get it, I totally get it, but still can't help but be disappointed by it. Also, the experience system in Armageddon is a straight up choose one guy who survived and he can level up. That's it. And the other chance to level up is if your guys get knocked out of action, they roll on a serious injury table afterwards, and if they roll a 6, they get to level up too. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger is the name of that one right there. And so you have a chance of getting more than one, but essentially you just choose one guy who survived. He could have done nothing the entire game, and he just gets to upgrade. Whereas in Necromunda, you gain experience for wounding your opponent or for carrying loot, and also everybody gains experience just for surviving a mission. And so you could have multiple people upgrade or nobody upgrade, and they just kind of get closer to it as well, which I like more, once again, because it satisfies the role-playing aspect of what I like to do. Now, before you go say, well, why don't you just go play a role-playing game? Well, I don't have time to. And so this really, I love the combination of the role-playing elements and the miniature wargaming elements that Armageddon allows me to do, or Necromunda really allowed you to do. So I wasn't a big fan of that either. Also, the other thing I didn't like was the equipment is too readily accessible. For example, one of the pieces of equipment is called a red dot laser sight, which you can attach to anything that's not a heavy weapon, and it gives you +1 ballistic skill, or +1 to hit. And your target also gets a 6-up invuln because they might spot the red dot, but that's minor compared to the fact that you just get +1 to hit in a game that was already trying to be tactical with shooting. Now, this red dot laser sight exists in Necromunda, but it is a rare item, which means normally you'd have to roll on a chart to see what items you even find, and you're allowed to then purchase those. And so it's not going to be very often that you find one of these. Furthermore, they're not really that expensive. They're 20 credits to buy. When you're assembling a kill team of a lot of guys, it feels like a lot at first. But between missions, when you're just given 100 gold to spend however you want, all of a sudden you can give 5 guys +1 ballistic skill. Or the photo visor for 15 points apiece. It allows them, if they don't move, to basically almost ignore cover, because it's the -1 cover becomes 0 and -2 cover becomes -1. And cover is a big part of the game. So all of a sudden you can just hand these out after a mission. You can just give it to a bunch of your guys, just like that. Those, once again, exist in Necromunda, but they're rare items, so you're not going to come across them as often. Also, Necromunda had cool items like bionics. They also had a much more extensive serious injury chart. The one in Armageddon is just a D6 chart. On a 1, you have a 50-50 chance of being dead or captured. On a 2, you lose a game and you're frenzied. On a 3, you lose a game and you're hatred. 4 or 5, you're fine. And on a 6+, you're fine, and you get to upgrade. In Necromunda, it's a D66 table, which means there's 66 different options, which isn't totally correct because the first 6 are just death. But then you have all these different things, like one of your eyes is lost, you lose some fingers, you take a leg injury, you take a chest injury, you take a head injury. And then there's all these bionics that you can find and have installed that not just get rid of that, so you find a bionic eye, then you can negate your eye injury, but then that bionic eye also gives you infrared vision. But once again, it's a rare item, so you're not finding them all over the place, and so it's harder to find those. And you get that really neat granularity to the whole thing. Once again, making excuses for Games Workshop here, because they have all these different factions. How do they do that? I'm not quite sure. I'm currently working on a campaign system for us to play in a different setting, which I'm really excited about. And I'm creating 6 custom factions for the 6 players. And the most exotic thing about these factions is there's humans, Genestealer Cult, there's orcs, and then there's chaos, there's like Inquisition type of thing, and then there's Ogrins sprinkled throughout with Grots as well. And so it's not really going into Necrons and Eldar and Tau, although I could probably figure out a way to make some of those factions work. So I get it. Even for me to make it work, I have to make the faction list a lot more narrow and then make the campaign system around what I decided to bring in. Whereas if I decided to have it be Necrons, Eldar, and Tau, I would build the campaign system differently. My dream would be that Games Workshop specialist team spends a lot of time making supplements for Armageddon that makes different campaign systems. I don't think they're going to do it, not because it wouldn't be good, but I don't think it's really worth it for them to put that much time into it, just because, once again, it doesn't push model sales. And you might be disappointed by hearing that, but in the end, that is going to be a big consideration for what they decide to do. And they've been doing a fantastic job making these specialist games, and then they can leave it to the community to all of a sudden come up with other things. Necromunda, even though it hasn't been supported for at least a decade, has a huge community following, especially at Yak Tribe, where I've been getting a lot of my information. And they've done a great job making a Necromunda Community Edition rulebook, and just having tons of downloads for new types of factions, new scenarios, just new ways to play the game. There's even modifications to the game like Inquisimunda, which combines it with Inquisitor, or Gorkamunda, which combines it with Gorkamorka. So the community does a really good job of that. So maybe they don't really need to if they're not looking to make this game super popular and it just becomes, once again, kind of a side thing for a specialist game. But, you know, it would be nice, of course. You want everything you want, and I love Armageddon so much and Necromunda so much that I want them to support it a ton, but we probably won't see that happening. The nice thing about the campaign system that they do have, though, is they kept the skill trees, which are complex enough, and they have it pretty granular in there as well, and so that's nice. So they did include, they kept that pretty much the same way. They did some minor updates to them to make sense with the new factions and all of that, but other than that, it's mostly looking similar to the way that Necromunda had there. So props to them for at least keeping the complex skill system and a slightly similar upgrade system to what they had in Necromunda. So rules-wise, or for the campaign-wise, I'd have to give it like a 6 out of 10 and 1.5 enthusiastic thumbs up, and maybe like a 3 out of 5 stars for that. Just because, let's put it this way, we played 10 games, and I was kind of bored of the campaign system after that. I'm like, I'm just not seeing what else I really care to do with my Genestealer Cult faction. It had nothing to do with how many games I won or lost. I just was kind of getting bored of these guys. They didn't have any character to them. They didn't really gain anything that's so interesting, like getting a leg injury, but then getting a bionic leg, or getting a certain upgrades that I don't have control over and some cool skills. It just didn't seem to be happening the way that I really enjoyed seeing it happen when we played back in Gorkamorka. So campaign system, it's really easy to learn, so I gotta give them props for that. It's really easy to play, and it doesn't really need many house rules. I know I instituted a house rule where you could bank your money, but even for the ones like Grey Knights and Harlequins, you can get away with not having to do that. In fact, Quirk in the end didn't end up even using that house rule because he happened to capture a couple of my guys and gain the extra credits from that, so didn't need it. But it's still a little bit of a kind of a luck of the die if you're going to get the extra credits or not when you're playing them. So really you can play it just as is vanilla right out of the box, and you can't complain too much about it. So Necromunda players, of course, are going to have complaints because it's not Necromunda, and I do agree with them. It's not Necromunda. Necromunda is a setting in the Hive world, or in the Hive city, Necromunda, and there's gangs, and this is not that. This is Armageddon, which uses the same rule set as Necromunda, but has a different setting, different factions, different campaign system, albeit it has some similarities to Necromunda. So no, it's not Necromunda, but it is kind of Necromunda. It's not even like 2.0 because the rules are pretty much the same. It's more like just, hey, we're going to create this different campaign system for Necromunda, re-release it with awesome new terrain and the models and the rule book and everything else. So the last thing I'll review is the box itself. I'm not going to do an unboxing here. I already did that. Essentially what's in here is the rule book. And it doesn't really matter for this because you can't get it anymore, I don't think. But the terrain is fantastic. And that is really the biggest thing because you can actually buy the terrain separately. I think it's available for pre-order right now in Games Workshop. Some of it's going to be available to order soon. But the terrain is fantastic. It looks awesome. And I can't wait. We're going to be building a big board of Games Workshop terrain, both with the new Armageddon stuff and some of their old City Fight stuff and the Sky Shield landing pads and bastions. And I really look forward to doing that. There's some awesome companies out there that do the MDF stuff like Banduo War Games and MicroArt Studios and Warsenal and many others that provide cheaper alternatives than the Games Workshop stuff. And it's MDF and it looks good. It doesn't look as good as the Games Workshop stuff, but it looks really good. We've played with a lot of that stuff on our tables, so that stuff is available out there for you to use. So that's it for my review. You can go and watch the final game between Steve and me, Orcs versus Jesus Occult. We had a blast, and that'll be in the vault at the video description, and the link at the video description below. If you're not a vault member, you can still click it, get a free 7-day trial, get instant access to all of the Armageddon battle reports, plus thousands of other battle reports, painting tutorials, behind the scenes, and everything else, and help to support us. Big thanks to all our vault members for supporting us, allowing us to do exactly what we do, and that is to be able to buy the models and terrain, pay for the building, pay for the employees, pay for us as well, so that we can make all these videos for your entertainment pleasure. And obviously we have a lot of fun doing it too. Thanks so much. Stay tuned for more Armageddon content. Stay tuned for more reviews and more battle reports and more everything else. Happy wargaming.